Hello, Blizzcon. How you guys doing? All right, I'd like to hear that.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Welcome to CostumeCraft, Cosplay Design and Fabrication. I am Zach Fisher. This is Hoku Props. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to bring a custom-designed cosplay to life, from pre-visualization through to the design itself, all the way through fabrication and beyond. So before we get to that, we'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about ourselves for those of you who don't know us. I am Zach Fisher, and I am a concept artist and illustrator. And for the better part of the past 4 years, I have been working with cosplayers from around the world of all different levels of skill and backgrounds to create custom-designed cosplay based on their favorite characters. Some of you guys may have seen the Syndragosa design, the human form Syndragosa design that debuted at the Ice Cream Citadel at San Diego Comic-Con. Did you guys see that with the Lich King? Yeah? Okay.
Delicious, by the way.
It was delicious. So I'm a lifelong Blizzard player and fan, and so this is kind of a big dream come true for me.
All right, I guess it's my turn. So, my name's Chad Hoku. I go by Hoku Props. You guys might remember me from last year as being the 8-foot-tall Lionheart that could run around and move and yell at people. And that was really one of the highlights of my life so far, especially in the cosplay category. But I've been working as a prop maker for going on 7 years now. I've always been a maker, though, since I was a kid. So the transition from being a maker to being a prop maker was really easy because I was already a maker and a nerd. So with that being said, I think we can move on.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about Uther, and to start it off, I'm going to let Chad talk to you about kind of where things started off.
So I was approached earlier this year. I won TwitchCon last year, so the cosplay contest with the Lionheart, and I was asked to be the judge this year, and it was kind of like, all right, I want to meet everyone's expectations, and I want to do something that just blows everyone away, validates what people expect from me, but also is really fun and something that I loved, because I think it's really important to cosplay something that you love. The emotional engagement when you are in something that you really kind of just feel and agree with is I always feel like a lot easier to connect with people. So the problem was, what am I going to make that was up there with Lionheart? And that was something that I said, okay, let's call Zach and see what ideas he has. Because he's a costume designer, and I know he makes beautiful work. And so I gave him a call, and I said, here's the deal. Don't talk about it, but I need to make a costume for this really, really cool event, and I think you are the person to help me figure what that is. And so we went back and forth with a bunch of different ideas, and we finally were like, I told him, I was like, I would love to bring Uther back to life. I would love to cosplay Uther. How might that be a possibility? And Zach's just like, let's do it.
Yeah. So, we started kind of brainstorming ideas. And, obviously, when it comes to Warcraft lore, there's a lot of people who get really, really strict about adherence to it. But, we posed the question, what if? Like, what if we could just do whatever we wanted, had carte blanche? So we started thinking, like, what happens? And this is, oddly enough, this is actually before the whole Argus patch came out, so we didn't really know what was going to happen. So it was kind of funny that it worked out the way it did. But we're like, what if Uther gets brought back to life by the Naru to lead the Army of the Light? And this is before Turalyon came back into the picture, so when that happened, we were kind of like, well, we weren't wrong. So we just kind of tried to figure out how would that look? Like, what would be elements of it? And I think I went to you and I said, well, what if he was, like, bursting at the seams with light? Like, he was completely, like, barely holding on to human form.
And it probably helped that I had an LED eye.
Well, that too. Yes. That definitely makes things, yes. Okay. So, part of my process at that point is, of course, to start thinking about style. So I literally just started looking at every aspect I could in the design. I started looking at versions of Uther that had existed all throughout Warcraft lore, all throughout Warcraft history. Anything that had to do with the Alliance, anything that had to do with Paladins, anything that had to do with the Silver Hand, weapons, armor, examples from the movie, examples from the game, from every game that he's been in. And I'm like, well, how can we bring this into one cohesive style that looks like it fits within the Warcraft universe, but at the same time is kind of like amped up. And there was a lot of back and forth with Chad and I, kind of like, do we put this in there? Do we not? And it was a fun challenge.
Right. Yeah, it was very fun.
So, yeah, there's my terrible Paladin pun there. So we started basically. We started at the beginning, and the thing you have to start thinking about first is what you would consider to be a style guide. What elements, be they certain shapes, certain textures, certain fabrics, certain metals, are part of this overall style guide that you can use to kind of narrow your focus. We started looking at proportions. Things like, Warcraft shoulders, I'm sure you guys know, are huge, like almost impractically huge on some races. How do we incorporate that into a way that immediately looks like it belongs in the Warcraft universe, but at the same time, is practical to wear, and it's not going to kill him, to wear it. You also have to think about things like silhouette. If you strip all the information out of the image except for just like the outline, does it still read as the character that you're trying to portray? That's really important. That gets used a lot in comics too. Captain America's little wings on his side of his head were a product of Jack Kirby needing to have a way to kind of show people, oh, that's Captain America from like a distance. The color palette.
So to add a little bit to this silhouette thing, I really can't kind of stress this enough. So I judge costume contests nowadays, and the very first thing I look for is actually the silhouette. So when you come in with, like, let's say you're competing and you come in with this incredibly detailed costume, but the silhouette, the outline of this costume, so to speak, is off, every single little detail that you did essentially becomes flawed because the overlying image that we're looking for is imperfect. So that's something to really consider is try to nail the silhouette of the costume and then add the detail because it's going to come through much better.
Yeah, and then moving on to a color palette. You don't want to have a beautifully designed costume that the colors just don't read as what you're trying to put out there. Like if I were to make Uther's cloak orange, it wouldn't look right. If the gold wasn't the right color, if it was more like a rose gold, it might look cool, but it's not Uther immediately. So that's another consideration. And then a big thing that Chad immediately talked to me about was mobility and comfort. And those two things, how they integrate into what he had to do.
Yeah, I told him, I said, I need to be able to sit for 8 hours in costume. Make that happen. And he went, I got you, Chad.
I got you, right. And it's not an easy task because, there's a lot of things to consider. Pinch points, weight distribution, balance. Are you going to kill somebody the moment you try to walk past them in a crowd? It's really important things to consider. So with all that information considered, all of that stuff thought out, the first thing that I did was I sat down and I started working on a rough sketch. Just blocking in shapes, blocking in rough details. Okay, there's going to be a loincloth here, and these are the shape of the shoulders. And a lot of it didn't make it into the final design because we looked through it and said, that looks cool, but it's not practical. One big example of that is on the right shoulder. Initially, we had designed little scales of judgment to be held, grasped by eagle talons. And no matter how I tried to make that work visually, we just thought, they're just going to be dangling there. They're going to tear off. They're going to bump into somebody. They're going to be, kind of just in the way the entire time. So that's just one of those things you have to kind of edit out. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about that, or?
When he sent that to me, I was very excited. I was also quite frightened because even from the rough sketch, I could tell it was going to be a big project. But I was very excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then from there, once we've kind of got the entire design kind of worked out, The next step is to refine everything. You really want to just kind of take what you've got and clarify it. So during the rough sketch phase, you really do have to have in your mind's eye where you're going with it. It doesn't have to be precise, but you have to have a general idea. So that by the time you get to the point where you're refining everything, you can put all those little tiny details in it and really bring it kind of that life that it needs. And then obviously the next step is to give it a color scheme. So pull in the right colors. Play with the colors a little bit, with an eyedropper tool in whatever program you're working in, so that you can change the intensity of the blue or the hue or the type of gold. Especially with Warcraft, you really want to be bold with your colors. Most Blizzard properties have really intense, bold, saturated colors, and that's kind of a mark of those styles that you really have to consider. And then something I often get into on my Twitch channel is I always say, the devil is in the detail. And I mean, that's kind of everybody's heard that phrase, but ultimately what I'm referring to there is not just the amount of detail you add in, but the details you choose to omit. Because, you could, if you wanted to, just noodle on everything and put detail everywhere, but then your costume kind of just ends up looking like a pile of random detail, and your eye doesn't have anywhere to just kind of rest throughout the design. There's nowhere to focus on, because everything is as detailed as everything else. So you want to pick focal points and go, that's important, that's not. So then Chad got to work after I got things to him there.
I just saw the title of this slide, by the way. And yeah, it's oddly fitting. Can I have that little?
Yeah, you can have this.
Thank you. All right, so it's my turn now. A little bit more background about myself. I went to school for video game animation and modeling. Did a lot of that, enjoyed the heck out of it, but realized pretty quickly I was probably not going to make much money as an artist, which is funny because I'm now an artist. But so during that process, I learned things like ZBrush, I learned things like Maya, learning about spatial kind of awareness in a digital environment is definitely something that has helped me. And so this right here is actually a life scan of my body. That is as close as most of you will see me in that state. But as you can see, my head's missing, thus the title. So the one big benefit about working in 3D is that I can plan things very, very well without spending a single dime. And that is something that I want to do because these costumes get quite expensive if you're not careful. So with that being said, the other benefit of having a life scanner yourself is that it is proportionately accurate to the inch, to the millimeter. And what that allows me to do is build everything digitally while still maintaining the proper scaling and use that as reference in the future. With that being said, let's move on. So you can see I started going through and building all of the accessories, all of the details like this guy and the belt buckle, the other brooch, and one of the things that I also thought was going to be really important is designing how everything would assemble. So you can see my right shoulder pad actually is two different shoulder pads that are stacked, okay? And so I was able to digitally model a spacer that would have room for bolt holes and bolts and getting in there and doing work on it. This whole costume, for the most part, is actually all bolted together with Chicago screws, with nylon bolts. And what that allows me to do is actually go through and fix things when they break and just adjust things. Glue, while it's wonderful in many ways, is also permanent, hopefully sometimes. So you can see we've got on the outer shoulder pad, there's actual alignment mechanisms. So this has got it's kind of like a tongue and groove system. And so the back of that eagle actually has this groove that lines up perfectly on the right shoulder. And there's just a nice shot of the whole thing digitally assembled. And I think it turned out pretty good considering. And that's just a front profile. So, of course, Material Girl. So this is just the materials that are used. This is the process used. By doing things in 3D, it gives me the option to use tools such as a 3D printer, using things such as a CNC router, using things such as a laser cutter, while all kind of interacting together since I have the accurate measurements on the computer. Something else that was really important was weight. Weight is always a big factor for me in a costume. When I make a costume, I want to be able to wear it all day. I will be able to wear this costume all day, and that's because it only weighs probably 15 to 20 pounds. So the scale mails, for example, they look pretty good, right? They're plastic, okay? And the way that I'm able to make them look metal is utilizing what is known as a metallizing paint, okay? And so what that does is you basically take a super, super shiny reflective paint, like a high gloss black, and then you tint it to look metallic. And that's what it is. That's what most of the paint on the armor is. So the other thing that I do is when I model stuff, I plan for how I'm going to attach it. I plan for how I'm going to mount LEDs in it. And so that is something also. The cloak was crazy. My wonderful, lovely girlfriend and did all of this embroidery work. And we wanted to make sure that all that embroidery work was going to go on something that looked good. And so we used microsuede for the actual material. And then to get the embroidery as perfect as I could do for her, we made a bunch of stencils. And those stencils are all laser cut. They're all designed on a computer, again. It's we apply chalk over that stencil and then embroider it. So no one can destroy the metal. Thanks, Zach. So there's an issue that I have with most costumes, and that issue is that most people spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours working on them, and then the very final step before they paint them, they skip. And that step is wet sanding, okay? So when you sand something with, let's say, a 320 grit sandpaper, it's really, really fine sandpaper. The problem is it still leaves sanding scratches. And if you paint that over that sanding scratch, you're gonna see it. I'm gonna see it. When I judge something and people walk in and there's sanding scratchers covering this beautiful suit of armor, it saddens me to no end. So take the extra day, which is what it takes, and get, 1,000, 2,000 grit wet and dry sandpaper and sand it. It will make your costume 100 times better. So this is more examples of just the metallizing process, getting the paint right. There's a shot of the shoulder pad. Sorry about the mess in the background. And then finally, this is all of the armor. This is all after I painted it, and it was perfect. And then the only final step after that is the weathering process. So realistically, any costume that you make, it can use a little bit of weathering. It can use a little bit of accenting, whether it's scuff marks, whether it's a little bit of just dirt and grit and grime. What it does is it enables all of the edges to pop, okay? And so there's a bunch of different ways to do it. You can watch my Twitch stream. You can even ask Zach. He can tell you how to do it. But essentially, just go through and detail the costume and make sure that what you're doing is paying off and that you're also having fun. So here's an image of everything. This is not edited at all. This is just taken with really nice lighting. But you can see, even in a dark environment, all of the edges on the visible parts pop. So, and there's just another shot. All right, so final slide, for me at least. Oh, by the way, there's going to be a Q&A after this. We forgot to say that.
Yeah, there is going to be a Q&A, so if you have questions for us, you can line up on either side. And we'll...
Yeah, you've got about a minute to figure those out. So friends and family are important. They are the people that enable us to do this. They are the people that make sure that we eat and drink food and water when we forget to do that. Because let's be honest, we are all self-sacrificing humans. This cosplay world is rather painful and rather sleep-depriving, so
yeah,
just cherish them. Cherish them.
No costume is worth sacrificing your health over. Like, as nice as it is, you never want to permanently sacrifice your health over it. So yeah, take time. Spend it with friends, spend it, with family, play some video games, whatever you need to do to kind of reset yourself and get ready for the next push.
So with that being said, I think we are ready to have a Q&A.
Yes, we are.
What do you say? Can we go ahead and accept all questions now? We're going to go from left to right once again.
Or right to left.
Or right to left, because that's the first person. Hi, can you go ahead and tell me what your name is and what your question is?
My name is Zach. I kind of have a two-part question. Time is valuable on its own, but in terms of cost-wise, but material-wise, how much did you spend, if you can reveal that to us, how much you spent on just materials?
So if I sit here and think about it, I can ballpark. I probably spent about $300 on filament. I probably spent about $300 on leather and like buckles and stuff. The paint was about $200, so I'm just gonna average ballpark. This whole costume was probably about $1,200 to $1,500. That's
Okay.
just with all the random stuff. Keep in mind, I'm a prop maker for a living, so I had a bunch of stuff already.
And experience. And a tack onto that, just one last, mention, as in terms of hours that you put in, you have a ton of experience, but how many hours did you roughly put into this costume?
Once again, to ballpark it, so I have to preempt that by saying because I design things digitally, it means the problems that normally occur for most people don't happen for me because I've thought through a lot of that stuff and I'm able to see what sort of things are going to bind and whatnot. This costume, with that being said, and the couple people that have helped, probably has a good 200 to 300 hours in it, at least.
Thank you.
Hi, what's your name?
Hey, I'm Colby. First time here. Great place.
All right.
I agree.
You were saying that you want to be able to wear it all day, but what confuses me is how you can do things like the boot armor and keep it from just flying off consistently. So I was wondering what your tips would be to kind of keep that stuff attached while you're running and jumping.
Well, realistically, I don't plan on running, although I think I actually could run in these. So because I use the life scan, this armor fits around me perfectly. It literally cups around me. There's enough tolerance between my calf muscle and the armor to allow for actual movement, but as you can see, it's actually articulate, nothing's binding, nothing's hitting. And so I definitely think one of the things that is important with a new costume is to just go out and walk around in the feet or the boot situation that you've got and learn how to wear it. That's something a lot of people, including myself, are guilty of doing, is showing up the day of and they're going, oh God, I can't do this. And then that's one of the reasons that a lot of people aren't able to wear the costumes for extended amounts of times because they haven't thought through all the logistics of it.
Do you bring a kit out for repairs?
Absolutely, absolutely. Although I tend to fix other people's costumes more often.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Viewers Workshop. Welcome. Nice T-shirt. I love it.
Thank you. I like it as well. So when you two collaborate with either Chad with an artist or Zach with a cosplayer, what are your top 3 do's and don'ts of collaboration? Best advice to make that as seamless as far as the design, the construction, just to make sure that everybody is happy.
So I'll start, but I bet Zach has a couple too. So the most important thing that I can think of is don't wait on them, okay? So there are so many different components that you can be working on when they're trying to work on their stuff. If you wait for one specific thing, you're gonna run out of time. And that's always the biggest fight with these sort of costumes and designs, is having enough time to really accomplish what you set out for. Case in point, Zach's a busy individual. If I need some detail from him and he is doing something, I'll sit down, I'll start working on the leather harness. I'll start working on the strap circumstance. I'll start doing logistics planning because all of those things, while Zach's able to help me kind of come up with solutions, doesn't mean he's gonna be the one doing all of it. So sit there and say, what can I be doing right now that I don't need Zach for? And if you do that, you're probably gonna come up with a lot of different solutions, right?
Yeah. Adding on top of that is communication. You need to communicate. If you're collaborating with somebody, it's really important that they know where you're at right now, time-wise, and in terms of like how long it's going to take you to get what you need to have done, and vice versa. Like there were a lot of emails and messages back and forth between the two of us saying, what else do you need? Do you need anything right now? I'm going to be gone for this weekend. Can I get you anything before I do that? So keeping that communication line open is important in any group project. But yeah, like Chad said, you get to a point where it's you have to really think about just what else can I be doing right now? What can I do to optimize the time that I have? So,
Thank you.
thank you for the question.
That wasn't 3, but I think those were juicy answers. All right, next up. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Jen. I just had a quick question specifically regarding armor. Like, I've got a sewing machine, I'm fine when it comes to that. But for those of us that don't have a 3D printer or access to a scan of your body, how would you recommend starting about creating armor pieces?
Sure. So, one of my favorite resources that I like to use is this individual called Bill Duran, which I saw earlier, and he supplies all sorts of solutions on making products by hand, making props, making armor. He's also got templates and guides. He goes by punishprops.com. And so, I'm going to stand up. My belt is EVA foam. I made it, I designed it, made it. It's all done by hand. The same with the ab pieces, and that's just because when it came down to it, I was running out of time. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is there are so many different options as far as armor making nowadays. It's absolutely insane and wonderful, and I love it. The only reason I do stuff in 3D is because it gives me the option to plan a little bit better. With deadlines that I faced by doing this for a living, it's definitely something that has to be consistent. But when you're working on your own project, you have a little bit more leeway to do that. So that's what I would say. Check out Bill's stuff, or Evil Ted, or half a dozen different artists, really.
Yeah, really any material you use, whether it's foam or Warbler or really anything, resource the community. Find, people that are, what's that?
The rpf.com.
Oh, yeah.
Tons of resources.
Replica Prop Forum, and look it up. See who's working with it and see how they handle things.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi. I love your Pepe.
Oh, thank you.
Both of them.
Hi. My name is Jamie. I just had a kind of general question of, I know you do a lot of planning, but whenever you do have something go wrong, how do you kind of bounce back from like those epic failures of a key piece just not working out?
So if you notice my hand wraps, they are supposed to be gloves. So when I showed up earlier, I went, oh no, where's the left glove? Oh, it's in my friend's car who drove last night. So luckily enough, I typically bring some extra, padding and leather and just different accessory bits that I can use. And so it's like, well, I can lose my cool about it, or I can just make something work. And I mean, I'm happy with the handguards. I actually think I like them more than gloves because I can do this and touch things and drink and be happy. And so that's what it really comes down to, is just like the world is not going to end because you're having a costume malfunction. And if you go into it with that mentality, it's going to put you in much better spirits, as well as kind of just the ability to critically think your way out of those problems. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi. So my question is, with characters so wildly popular as the Blizzard characters, they appear in so many different games. There's these different design choices made when they're making them for those games. How do you decide the source material when you're going to design a costume? You know, if a character spans over 3 games.
Well, I mean, it really just depends on, that's kind of where the communication comes in handy. I really tend to go off of the cue of whatever the person who I'm designing for wants to accomplish. If they want something big and bulky and impressive, then we'll do that. If they want something more subtle and kind of sleek, we'll do that. You really just have to kind of look at everything that's out there that you can find. I usually dedicate almost an entire day, if not more, to just sitting at my computer and just on Google search, just looking for anything that I can get my hands on to look at. And you start to, when you do that, you start to notice patterns in the way that certain decisions are made about designs. So you'll see an older version of a character, and then you'll see what has been kept when they've been updated. And that's typically a pretty good signal for, oh, that's important to that character's look.
Like the eagle.
Right, the eagle for Uther's shoulder setup, where he's got the fabric over one shoulder and then like the eagle on the other. It's like you can't just get rid of that, right. Because then it immediately kind of takes away kind of a tentpole thing for Uther. Things like color palette, like we were saying earlier, are super important as well. So you have to kind of get to a point where you play with it back and forth. Honestly, do as many iterations as you can. Like I'll do 5, 6 different versions sometimes of the rough sketch, just to see what's working and what's not. And with some cosplayers, I've sat down with them with the 5 or 6 that we've got, and I'll just cut and paste pieces over the same mannequin so that they can kind of mix and match what they like and what they don't like, or what works and what doesn't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Can you talk a little bit about the lighting on your costume and especially your eye? Because that's amazing.
So the lighting was something that when you see LEDs used, because they're mostly what's used nowadays, one of the big issues is just diffusing that light property. And so there's only really 2 ways to do it. You either have to space the LED away, which is something you do during design stage, right? Or what you use is a diffusing material, something that has diffusal properties. So in this case, acrylic, which is very commonly available, you can order offline as well. There's a thing called diffusing acrylic, and what it does is just helps light scatter. It doesn't diminish light's refraction. It doesn't get rid of it. It just literally bounces it around, okay? And so all of the different lights over this have 1, 2, and even sometimes 3 layers of diffusing material kind of involved. But I also, rather than having the LEDs shine straight, pretty much anything like the belt and all that, the LEDs actually point inwards, and there's refracting material in the back. It's just aluminum like ducting tape, and that works really well as long as you don't ground out the LEDs. The actual LEDs I used are a newer material, or a newer LED from Adafruit, which is, it's got 144 pixels on it, I think per, I don't know how long, it's just a lot. And so it's almost seamless, and it just is super bright, it creates just plenty of light, and it just looks wonderful. Now to talk about the eye, so a couple years back I was working in the shop, and I had a piece of equipment fail, lost the eye. And so me being the positive, crazy man that I am, said, okay, what can we do with this? So first of all, I was like, all right, we can do really cool, fun painted eyes. So being a special effects artist, I know exactly how they make eyes. I know exactly what they do, materials used, so I can do it safely, which is not something most people can do. But the one thing I wanted to do was make a Terminator eye. I wanted to do something that would light up and just bother people, because I'm a troll. And yeah, I was the guy in WoW, the rogue in WoW, you guys would have hated, by the way. So I made the eye, and I got it working, and there's been a couple different models since then, and each one has worked better and had things I liked and things I didn't. And that's one of the things that I can't stress enough is during the cosplay process, what's so cool about cosplay is it teaches you a bunch of skills which also are going to be useful in real life. So things such as working on your house, fixing things in your car, electronics in your car. Come on, you're doing lighting on costumes. It's kind of similar. It all runs off of DC anyway, right? So that's really what I would say is just, have fun with everything. I know we segued a little bit from lights, but that's what I do.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Keith.
Hey, I'm Keith from Kit Kat Cosplay. The other half is right over there.
Hi there.
I was wondering, what do you see the most common gotchas from a cosplayer perspective and a costume design perspective? Things that you're like, you shouldn't have done that. The things that you see that most frequently, like the wet sanding you mentioned.
Rust-Oleum. I'm sorry if there's a advocate for Rust-Oleum out there. I don't like it. And it's used too often on paint. It takes a while to dry. So Rust-Oleum is really good because when it finally cures, it is very, very durable. The problem is on props and costumes, most costumes are not made months ahead of time. And so when you show up at a con and you reek of Rust-Oleum, or really a lot of other paints, that's a big, why did you do that? That's fine. It bothers me. It gives me a headache.
So I've got 2 big ones. From a design standpoint, there's 2 things that you want to avoid when you're designing. One is that you want to make sure that you're applying your detail carefully. Like I said before, a big trap that a lot of people fall into is that they're like, I want to make this costume really detailed so that it's really impressive. So they put detail everywhere, literally everywhere. And it might be really impressive if, just for like really close-up shots of things, but when you see it on the show floor, you're like, it kind of just looks like a pile of leaves because everything is just everywhere. So you really want to be very careful and specific about where you put your detail. And then the second one is that you don't want to create anything that is going to immediately cause discomfort for you. Whether that's you have to think about like movement of
Sharp
leg pieces.
edges.
What's that?
Sharp edges.
Sharp edges, yeah, that's another big thing too. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, you don't want to cause a problem that's immediately going to cause discomfort for you or for other people. So, yeah, thank you.
Hey, Zach. So I'm a photographer myself, and one of my pet peeves is cosplayers who pick a color palette that doesn't quite show up very well.
Can you stand a little closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
So as a photographer, one of my pet peeves is cosplayers that pick a color palette that doesn't really show up very well in photos, and I have to go in and have to do extra retouching over and over again to try and get that color to really pop. Do you have any suggestions for how they can try and find a better paint that's more likely to actually stand out better, or any advice on picking out their own color palette so that they can really make sure that their costume is going to stand out in like a photo?
Well, I mean, that could be a result of either a poor color choice in the design, or it could be just a material choice. When it comes to photography, you're kind of entering a whole other world of complications and difficulties that you have to consider. From a color design standpoint, you really just want to avoid things that cause kind of a weird clash. Nicely blended colors that kind of fit together well. Primaries work. There's a whole color theory thing. There's a book by James Gurney called Color and Light that I reference a lot to kind of understand color and lighting better. To help kind of avoid those things. But from a material standpoint, I mean, Chad would be able to tell you more specifically.
Honestly, what I would recommend is you should create a bunch of tutorials on how to plan for being photoed. If you made a YouTube video about it, I'm sure people would watch about it. Because that's the one thing that all of us really want and are hungry for is just information on how to really pull off the best costume that we can. This might sound bad, but dude, ignorance is just dangerous. It's something that you learn over time. Hey, this is something that looks good. This is something that doesn't. That's something that a lot of cosplayers kind of learn over time is like, oh yeah, the paint on that just didn't work very well. And one of the things with armor that you can do that will help with that is to make sure that you have a very good base coat that you're painting on. So the properties of most paint that people are using, they're actually meant to go on something that is primered. And what that does is that gives you an even neutral color that is not going to dull the finished product. So the paint that you put on that's wet is not the color it's going to be when it dries. So do paint tests, something that cosplayers, this is not something that's going to help you as much, but something that you should do is do a paint test with all of your different planned paints. Use the process on a test piece, even if it's a piece of scrap metal, and see what it looks like when it's done as a cosplayer. Mind you, do it, seriously. And then you can even take pictures of it and say, hey, is this going to be something that shows well? Because you want to take kind of pride in what you've done, and a lot of that is all logistics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I had a quick question.
What's your name?
My name's Nick. Hi.
Hi.
What's up? How did you actually attach the shoulder plates? Because when I tried to do it, I ended up with this stretchy thing that made me feel like I was working out constantly, and it was awful after a few hours. Like you pointed out about wearing it all day.
So I have a 2-point harness. So this one is 2-point, this one is 1 point. This one is just really great because it cups around my arm, and that just holds it in place for the most part. This one, on the other hand, I can stand up and turn. If you look on the interior, when I move my arm, you'll see a strap.
Yes.
So what that does is that it doesn't inhibit my movement. I can actually raise my hand. And that's something that is wonderful because it means I can take a bottle of water and go. So, so that's what it is. If you want to see the costume up close, by the way, we're going to actually be wandering around up here for probably the next hour after this, just so if you guys have more questions or don't want to ask in front of a crowd.
And then I hope nobody minds. I also had a design question about you're looking at Warcraft references and fantasy lore and all of that, but do you look at a lot of like historical suits of armor or things like that, or various cultures? And I'm wondering if you've ever encountered any neat things of, oh, that's why they use a cod piece or something like that. Weird tidbits as you're building these things.
Absolutely. People, for what it's worth, if you look at historical references, there's a reason that they were successful and that civilization typically lasted, it's because A, they had a functioning government of some sort, and B, they were probably really good at fighting. And that required things like weapons and armor and yada, yada, yada.
So, no, I was just going to add to that, I spent a good amount of time back in college just in an art museum that had an armor court, just studying how things fit together.
That sounds awesome.
It was amazing. Oh my God, I just sit there and sketch all day. And it was a lot of fun. And you learn a lot about how things fit together, how they move, how they're intended to move. If you have a museum near you that has something like that, invaluable to understanding it better.
Also, real quick, if you have any questions, get on up here. We've got about a minute going, so we're going to rapid fire these.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
So, question for Zach about designing. You're really well known for a lot of like your armor-heavy designs for costumes. Do you see yourself working more with like fabric-heavy things soon?
Oh, absolutely. No, I love working with. I love designing fabric stuff, and kind of soft sculpting. But I actually don't often get like somebody requesting it. So it's like pretty much the same thing with recently. Everyone's been saying, "Oh, well, you design mostly female costumes." It's like, no, they're just the ones that slap the money down and say, "Here, make me something." Like, okay. So, I mean, I don't discriminate on it. So, yeah, I'd love to.
And a second part, why are you so satanic with the detailing
What's
on
that?
your designs?
What?
Like the satanic streak.
Satanic?
Yeah, with the detailing on everything.
A lot of people say, why are you so angry at cosplayers? I'm not. I just give them what they ask for. It's not my fault they didn't think it out. Like.
All right, we're gonna get her out of the way. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Autumn. So I made my first cosplay this time, and I actually wore it. But what I noticed is that after I was wearing it for a few hours, that the paint was transferring on everything, and I felt like I did the primer, I coated it properly, and I even put a sealant on the
What kind
acrylic
of paint?
afterwards. I did acrylic, and then I detailed some of it with oil, but it was mostly like 90% acrylic, and then I put an acrylic coat on top of it.
Do you have it? Do you have any of it with you?
In the hotel.
If you want me to take a look at it, I'd take a look at it after this.
I was planning on maybe putting it
Or
back
sending
on and getting
pictures and
ready
I'll text
later. But yeah, it just, everything, like all the red rubbed off, all the silver rubbed off, and everything just looked messy afterwards.
So do me a favor, Hoku Props, right?
I follow
shoot me
you.
a message and a picture of it on Facebook.
Okay.
Can we get her question, and then I'll help you out. Thanks, by the way. Hi.
Hi, I'm Tatiana. One of the things I realized with my last piece is that you start, if you don't, not even on plan, like time is gonna run out, and you're gonna realize things break. Some things don't work out as they were planning. So like, I'm gonna spend 100 hours on this and end up actually being 200 hours or whatever. How do you handle the fact that you're running out of time and you see a piece that is not exactly finished, but you need to get ready for the convention? How do you handle all this process?
So, we're out of time, but I'll answer your question. The simple fact is, if you're missing a piece, it's probably not the end of the world. It really isn't. I always tell people, so I'm going to bring judging back in. A good example of this is somebody who has spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on beautiful armor, and then they rush a prop weapon because they feel like they have to have it complete. So I will say this, like, I have a hammer and a Libram that is unfinished at home. And I didn't bring it because it's not finished, and I don't want to rush it. I don't want to sabotage all that time and investment. And so it's all about kind of economy on what your choices are and what pieces are really going to be most important. So just don't worry about it. Come and have fun.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Final quick slide. This is our social media information. Take a picture of it. I'm Hoku Props on everything. Facebook, Instagram. I think I even have Amazon affiliate nowadays. Twitch streaming. I Twitch stream every week, 3 to 4 days a week from 11 to 3 p.m. And now to Zach.
And I'm Zach Fisher or Z Fisher Art on most things. Like I said, just go ahead and take a photo of that. Or if you find me on one, you'll find me on the others. I also stream on Twitch. I usually stream my design process, and we'll be doing a lot of that the next week or two on some new stuff. So
yeah, the majority of this costume was all done on Twitch, yours and mine.
Yes.
So, like I said, guys, we're out of time. Thank you so much for being here and listening to us. You know, we are normal humans. And if you have questions, please feel free to come up to and ask us. You can also just message us on social media. So thanks, everyone.